Hello everybody, this is Rob Sutherland. It's the 4th of July and I'm going to throw a dog bowl. But if you've been watching some of my other videos, you may have gotten the idea that I like to do things the hard way. So this one is going to be thrown in one direction and then flipped over while still wet and caved in the other direction. So we're going to have a skirt that comes up, a flat area, and then a hollowed out depression where the dog's food or water can go, and that wider base is great if you've got an active dog that likes to knock things over. So I'm using about 4 pounds of clay. I've got it mixed up fairly soft, and I have a bat attached to the wheel so that I'll have an easy time getting this flipped over. I'm also going to show you a really clever way to get it flipped over where it's already pre-centered. Doesn't work every time, but when it does, it's really handy. So I'm going to smack this down really well, because what is now against the bat is eventually going to be the top of our pot. So we don't want any gaps or air pockets. I'm going to make sure this is really smacked down well and adhered to the bat. This little bit of pre-centering can really save you a lot of stress when it comes time to center a bigger piece of clay. And then I'm going to use plenty of water and get it centered up. I'm going to start out by centering it narrow, just to make sure I've got everything kind of compacted and happy and attached to the bat, and then I'll go ahead and start bringing that base out wider. So I'm thinking about how big I want the top of my dog bowl to be, and this is overkill for our 10-pound little poodle, but a bigger dog will appreciate this. I've got it to about, what would I say, about 7-8 inches across. Now I'm going to go ahead and open down to a thickness that is not necessarily a finished bottom thickness. It's going to be a little bit thicker than normal because it's going to get stretched in the opposite direction. So I'm shooting for approximately 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to check it. I don't trust my depth perception here. And I have got way more than I need, probably 5/8. So I'm going to take it down a little bit deeper and recheck it again. Now we're at about 3/8, so that should be good. Make sure that I've recompressed that area where I checked it. And now I'm going to pull it straight out towards me. I just flung a little bit of hard clay there I'm going to get rid of. I'm going to use my thumb over here against the bat as a depth gauge. All right, so I brought the floor out wide, about to the same width as I had the base centered, and now I'm going to spend a little bit of time making sure that that floor is nicely compressed. And it's really worth taking a little minute and getting in here with a rib and smoothing it all out. One thing you'll find as you stretch a form, areas that are thinner will stretch more easily than areas that are thicker. So it's really a good idea to get it as even and accurate as possible before you start messing with it. This also tends to compress it and dry it out and make it a little bit more just friendly when it comes time to do the fancy step on here. All right. I feel like that is as good as it's going to get. So now, this is really simple to throw, actually. I need to bring this wall up. Now remember, when you're making something with a bigger diameter, it's a lot harder to collar in because we can't encircle the form, and encircling is the key to collaring. So I'm going to make sure that I start out with this fairly vertical, and then I'll decide how much I want to cant it outwards. Starting out, just distributing the clay upward, making sure it stays nice and compressed. It's really important to leave extra thickness at the rim because this rim will eventually be the base that your dog is going to be sliding the bowl around on. So if it's thin and breakable, it's not going to end up lasting very long. All right. That's feeling good. Got that extra thickness at the rim. And this one is fairly vertical, but as I said, it's a lot easier to bring this thing out wider than to gather it back in. So I'm going to double check that I haven't left any extra material down there at the base, and then I will go ahead and bend it outward. All right, that feels good. Time to stretch it so it has just a little bit of a wider stance on the floor. That should be nice. The rim is now where I want it. The line between that bottom corner and the rim is not exactly what I want. It's sort of flared out like a trumpet, and I would like it to be just a little bit straighter. Before I do that though, I'm gonna be smart. Sometimes I forget this step. And I'm gonna go ahead and trim off that little bit of excess down there at the base. It is so much easier to do that before you flare everything way out. All right, so I have cut a ring of clay off, and now I'm gonna just separate that ring of clay using my needle tool. I'm just coming under it horizontally and freeing it from the bat. And now what's cool is I can just split it and I can peel this whole ring of clay away in one piece, and it's just clean and neat and done. Just clean up the bat so I don't have goobers that are gonna get stuck back. All right, now let's adjust that profile. So I'm going to use Cheryl Mud Tool rib on the inside. I like the way they slide. And then I'm going to use a nice metal rib on the outside to give myself a good, crisp, finished looking surface. So metal rib, Cheryl rib. And I am putting them at the same point. If this was a clock face, probably 3 o'clock relative to how I'm looking. More like 4 o'clock relative to how I'm sitting. I think I'm going to give it just one more little bit of flare. Keeping these tools clean so they don't drag. All right, I've got kind of a nice little detail down here. I'm actually going to turn my rib around and emphasize that detail. I used the corner of the rib to dig in and create just sort of a finished pedestal look at the base of the foot. That'll help when I go to glaze so that the glaze doesn't run down and stick the piece to the shelf. And visually it's just more interesting than having the end of the pot just finish with no resolution. Okay, I'm happy there. May end up needing to do a little tiny bit of trimming right at the juncture between the wall and what will eventually be the top surface of the pot. One final pass with the rib, make sure I'm not leaving anything gooey. And then it's time to get the torch out and stiffen this rim and the upper part of the wall. I'm going to leave the floor alone because the floor needs to be stretchy enough to get caved downward. But I want this to be stiff enough that when I flip it onto another bat, I can still make that work. So I'm going to grab some water and clean my hands off. I always think it's important to clean your hands before you grab your torch. You don't want to gum up the mechanism with clay. My fancy torch used to stay on the little button. That part doesn't work because it got too many little contaminations. But it still does a great job of heating things up. So sorry for the sound. Of course, I have my wheel spinning. And I'm not waving this torch around. I'm drying one section at a time, moving slowly up and down the wall. And I have the business end of this torch right within 1.5 inches or so of the clay wall. You're going to waste a lot of propane drying your pots impatiently. You might as well get the most use out of it, and that's where the inner blue flame meets the longer, darker blue flame. That's where you get the most heat. You have to be a little bit careful when you're doing the outside of the pot. Remember that flame does deflect off the pot. You don't want to melt the plastic of your splash pan or of that plastic bat. Getting this rim dry enough that it can sit on it is the most important thing. Structurally, it's going to hold itself up, but even without that. We'll let that steam for just a second, and while it's steaming, I'm going to take my rib and I'm going to be very careful to get all the moisture off the bat. I left it there for the torching phase because if there's water on the bat, I can't melt it with the torch. But when I go to wire off, I don't want to drag water under the pot. That'll make it much more difficult to get it to separate and to be able to work on it from the other angle. All right, wonderful. I'm going to stop the wheel and check. And I'm getting there as far as that being dry enough. I think the humidity today out here on my front porch is at least 100%. Give it a little touch more on the rim. I'm believing that has to be dry enough at this point, burnt enough propane. So let me grab a second bat. And what I'm gonna do is wire this pot off. Hopefully it's not gonna move. And then I'm gonna center the second bat on top of the first one. That way when I flip it, it should already be pre-centered, which is kind of a cool little trick. So, got my fancy little twisted wire here. I've run that underneath. I kept my thumbs planted really firmly down to the wheel so that I got a nice even cutoff. Here's a situation where if you're good at tapping things on center, this will save you a lot of time. You place this on, eyeball it as close as possible, and then spin the wheel and center that bat. The better I get this done, the better it's going to be pre-centered when I flip it over. It's so much easier to do this than to have to try to center that really kind of sloppy, wet dog bowl, and you make a much bigger risk of messing it up. So there it is, it's centered on the other bat. Place a hand on top, don't hesitate, just flip it over. You don't want to spend any time at 90 degrees, you want to go from 0 to 180. And I'm going to figure out where my bat pin holes are and go ahead and put this bat on. Always Easier said than done. There it is. There it goes. You want to make sure it's stuck all the way down, and then very carefully put your thumbs on top and bend that bat so that it peels off. That shows you the pattern I get with my wiring off. I love for that to be part of the finished product. And this should be pretty well perfectly centered, or at least what I call good enough. I'll take the heel of my hand and just soften that edge, and then I don't have to do anything later. It's already good to go. And as you can see, it's already falling under its own weight in the direction we're shooting for. And we're just gonna help it along the way using a rib. So I'm gonna get the wheel going, and I'm gonna start out a little bit to the right of center. You don't wanna accidentally gouge, so be very careful. You're working on the line between the center and 3 o'clock. I've got this rib angled down a little bit so that it's smoothing the clay, not scraping the clay. Don't wanna remove any. And I'm gonna start out right of center, and then I'll find out where is the center. Move my way toward it. There I am at the center. And that's starting to cave in. This is an awfully big pot in terms of how much space it takes up for how much food or water goes in there, but if you've got that rambunctious dog, you'll be glad to have that stable base. That is caved down most of the way. I'm going to take it a little bit farther. You can feel it stretching. I'm going to work back towards that cut. And that's so cool. That's really sunk down in there. It is feeling like it's getting a little thin, so I'm going to be smart and stop. And I'm also taking the opportunity right now while it's this way around on the wheel to just to clean up that bottom that was hard to get at where I knifed it off. And I'm going to leave this interesting little hint of process. I've got a little mark here where my wire, the texture of the wire is still showing on this little band between the outer surface and the inner surface. And to me, that's just a little bit of mystery. It makes you go, huh, I wonder why or how or what they were doing to make this form. And that always, I like that when I see it in other people's work. So I like to try to incorporate it into mine. That's basically it. A pot like this, you don't have to trim a foot. The foot was made by throwing, and it's this big. And you basically just need to be careful to dry it slowly. You did put a lot of heat on this part, so it's a lot drier. That center part is a lot wetter. So it's very smart to dry these under plastic for a few days and let everything kind of just gel and even out. And then just fire it and glaze it and fire it again, and your doggy has a nice bowl to eat or drink out of. Thanks for watching. I know it was long, but it's a fun process, and it doesn't really take that long to make it in real life. Most of the time is spent torching that side. Thanks again.